Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon plenary. I hope you all have had a wonderful, enjoyable day so far. We have ahead of us a 45-minute session that will begin with a comms talk and then be followed by some remarks from the members of the Secretariat and their perspective on where we are. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Carlyn James from Think Place Kenya and her presentation, which is entitled How to Fail in the Most Difficult Context in the World, Defining an Enabling Environment for Human-Centered Design in Somaliland, Somalia.
Hello. I want you to take a minute and think about the last time you personally tried and failed at something. Now, imagine telling your friend that story over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. This is something that happens all the time, right? It's no big deal. It's actually comforting. We can chat with a friend, we get it off our chest, we receive a bit of support, have a laugh, talk about what we might have done differently. Now imagine you are in a job interview and you're asked about a professional mistake or a failure that you've made. Now this time you might alter that story a little bit. You might be a little more diplomatic about the way that you present it, but you might still give the impression that it wasn't really as bad as it actually was. Now imagine you're sitting across the table from your donor and being asked about a programmatic failure that you've made. I think everyone in this room is like, we don't make mistakes. So the point is this, you'd struggle with this, we all would. And in fact, if you play by the rules of the sector, you'd be motivated to avoid talking about it entirely. Failure is not new to the human experience, of course, but a comfort with communicating about and learning from failure is in many ways new to this sector. And that's what I want to talk about with you today. Now, this is probably going to be a little bit different than many of the other talks you're going to hear this week, which are focusing on what we're doing well. I want to talk about where we can improve, what we're not doing so well, where we're discouraged to fail, where we're afraid to fail, and how that's actually keeping us from making the kind of change we want to make. We have slides? Okay. So, let's see if I can run through the... Great. So, we want to talk about failure. Well, many political scientists refer to Somalia as a failed state. It's a place that's been embroiled in a cycle of conflict and drought and famine for decades, and it has some of the worst health indicators in the world. And many of us, I think of Somalia in this way. We really kind of only know it as a case study of failure in many ways. For the last 8 months, my team at Think Place Kenya and I have been working with PSI on a first-of-its-kind, large-scale demand creation for health services program in the Somali context. It's called Sahan, which means discover or explore. So essentially, we've been working with women and children. We've been having lots of great conversations. We've just been learning from them about their health service experience and how we can improve it, how we can just make it all a little more desirable. HCD, or human-centered design. So most of us in this room are probably going to be familiar with this methodology. It's an action-oriented process, which teaches us that those we're designing for should be those we're designing with. Born out of new product development in progressive urban centers like San Francisco and New York City, human-centered design is a distinctly adaptive and creative methodology, and it hinges on this belief that design should be democratic and inclusive, rather than elitist and exclusive like it's often thought to be. And while the values of HCD are really inspiring, little is known about how well these values translate across cultures and contexts. Many of the learnings we've had in the last 8 months of the program have been due to exactly this. That is, realizing that the culture inherent to HCD and the culture of the local context we're working in and the culture of the donor or development sector at large are not always in alignment. And so it's this friction and this failure, subsequent failure sometimes, that's really taught us how to design more effectively. So let me show you what I mean. I want to talk through 3 big kind of learning experiences that we've had over the program in the last 8 months. The first is going to be around our process and how we've adapted the HCD process to suit the local context that we're working in. The next is around people and relationships and how we've, again, had to learn through failure about how to build the right relationships and redefine those relationships so that it's more suitable to working adaptively. And the third is about products or outputs or the actual prototypes and interventions that we're making and how sometimes those things fail, and that compels us to ask why and learn more and redesign. Okay, so the first big learning experience I want to talk through is, again, how we've adapted our process, and that when it comes to learning through failure and working more adaptively, more flexibly, we can't really always assume that everyone's bought into this and excited about it. The Somali day starts really, really early in the morning due to the first sunrise prayer. And it's segmented according to prayer times throughout the day. So it's relatively rigid, and social life more broadly is also quite prescribed, heavily prescribed by various religious and social norms. So the day ends still quite early. Having some tech issues. Okay. So again, there's a sort of relative strictness about the lifestyle that presents a challenge to HCD, where we're trying to spontaneously create and make things and iterate. We're trying to keep energy levels high. We are trying to mobilize resources quickly so we can test. This is how quickly we were turning around things and prototyping and building them and going out to deploy them at various health facilities throughout the weeks that we were there during the first design sprint. And so one example of this kind of friction that resulted from this way of working with the sort of local context is that this is a small example, but one of many, where we were talking with our driver and having a bit of an argument about wanting to go deploy a prototype at a specific health facility at a certain time that conflicted with the evening prayer, and so that we had to kind of work around, the commitments that he had and sort of the needs of the process as well. Don't know if I'm pointing at the right thing. Okay. So the next sort of big learning experience I want to share with you today is about the relationships we build with the donor and how we're redefining that. So we're really fortunate in this program to have a donor that is excited about what we're doing and happy to be conducive to the way that we work and is very conscious of it. They're allowing us, or sort of giving us time and space and permission to rethink and unthink and redesign some of these constructs that guide so much of the way that we work. Many of us are familiar with this logic model, which is very linear, very deterministic, very causal, and it's sort of guided the way that we've thought about change and the way change happens for so long. So one of the ways that we're working with the donor to reinvent those tools that I was talking about earlier is by thinking less about things as a simple linear system and really opening up our thought to understanding that we do work in complex contexts, and so iterative ways of working are more conducive to those contexts. This clicker. All right. The last thing I want to share with you is about how failing early and failing often, you'll hear designers say this a lot, allows us to buy time and buy money, so to speak, saves us time and money in the long run. So we had a hunch about confidentiality and privacy being an issue for women in Somalia early on in the process, and we had been told by a few people that this wasn't really as big a deal as we thought, but we decided to talk to some women, and they confirmed that this was in fact a big problem for them when they went into health facilities to ask about family planning methods. So we decided to design an intervention around it. We designed a training course for health workers, and then we coupled that with some signage at the health facility that signaled to women who were coming in for consultations that their privacy could be ensured during the consultation. This was one of the biggest failures in the program. It was an abject failure as a prototype, and the reason we know this is because we sent in a couple mystery shoppers, and we heard from one of the mystery shoppers that the women were talking on the phone while they were in the consultation room. We heard that they were talking about other women, there were other nurses in the room, and it was just kind of a disaster. So we realized that what we did wasn't enough to sort of change behavior, but it compelled us to ask why. And I think that's kind of the big takeaway there. So I'll quickly conclude. I know we're short on time, but it's this interesting clash of cultures between designers, the local context, and the aid and development sector that isn't a failure in itself, but it does present certain opportunities for learning that have profoundly shaped the program. The aid and development sector now more than ever really needs to start embracing learning through failure, not as a token activity, not as a reporting activity, but as a real practice, a reflective practice. I'll get to that in a second. Given some of the safeguarding and harassment issues that we've seen recently in the news, all of us in this room, have a lot of eyes on us, and I think people are really eager to see that the work we're doing is as meaningful as we all know that it is. So we've got to start thinking of ourselves as problem solvers and not really as implementers or even documentarians. So if you'd like to learn more about what we were doing in Somalia and some more candid anecdotes about all of that, you can pick up one of these little red books in the back. I think some of you have already grabbed one. But I think a lot of us are going to leave today thinking like, sure, Carly, this all sounds really romantic and nice, this failure thing. But I'm here to tell you it's possible. We're doing it. And we're doing it in one of the most challenging contexts in the world. So thank you so much.